In this video, I'm going to show you how to install this crown molding on top of these kitchen cabinets. And if you're new to this channel, my name's Josh. Your channel is all about building your own house, saving a ton of money. So be sure to subscribe, ring that bell so you get notification every time I release a new video, and hammer that like button for me. That's all I ask in return for making this video. So we got a lot to do today, so let's get started. Before I show you how to physically install this crown molding around these cabinets, I think it's important to know a little bit about the crown molding. So one very important part to crown molding is understanding the spring angles. And now what a spring angle is if you place this crown molding right up into this corner, this is going to represent the wall and this is going to represent the ceiling. Now let me dive into this a little bit further. I'm going to explain to you how the spring angle is calculated. The spring angle is the difference between the wall and the crown molding and this angle right here between the two. So as you can see, this is a 45 because we got equal distances from this point to the bottom of the crown here, and then from this point to this part of the crown, it's even. You know it's 45, but I want to show you how it's calculated. If you take a protractor, right here is the pivot point. Just keep sliding it up until your pivot point lines up with this part that represents the wall. And if you look up here, it runs up and ends right at a 45-degree angle. So that is a 45-degree spring angle in this crown. Now, if it pushes over to where it's like this is what's going to represent a 52-degree spring angle about right there. So this crown is obviously not meant to be a 52-degree, but it does come in 52-degree, and a 38-degree would be more like this. Now that you know what the spring angle is and how it's calculated, I'm now going to go over the three very common types of spring angles that the crown molding comes in. The first one we got is a 38-degree angle, and as I mentioned earlier, the 38-degree is going to be more of a angle like so. So when it's setting like this up against the wall, you're going to see more of the face of the crown. So a lower ceiling height is going to need a more flat face like that. And the higher the ceiling height, the more you're going to want it pitched down like this, so that way you can see more of the design. So since this is for crown molding around a kitchen cabinet, it's at a 45. It's kind of a neutral angle. So that's what this crown that we're going to be installing in this video is. In order to cut the crown molding with these specific spring angles, I made this chart to preset the miter and the bevel of the saw. So if you have a miter saw, you can move the head of it. Most of them anyways can be beveled one way or the other, and that's where the head leans over to the left or the right. And then you got the miter, and that's where the saw can go at different angles like so. And again, I'm going to show you all this here in a minute. But if you take a look, you can reference this video to get this chart so you can come back to it if you need to cut at a specific spring angle. So if you take a look, the 38-degree spring angle is going to need the miter set at 31.6 and the bevel at 33.9. And then this particular one is going to be a 45-degree for what's going on these kitchen cabinets. So I'm going to be using a miter of a 35.3 and then a bevel at a 30-degree. And these are actually pre-marked on the saw, so it's going to be very easy to find those when we go to do it. And then we got the 52-degree spring angle, and then here are the settings for the saw. And if we take a look here, that's just a reference to use to locate the spring angle, the crown molding, ceiling, and then the walls over here. So now that we know a little bit about spring angles and how the angles work, let's go cut some trim. This is the miter saw that I'm going to be using to cut this crown molding. Now I'm going to show you some features here that this one has that you really don't need, but it is nice to have if you're cutting crown molding. So let's start with the bevel first. This can bevel this way and this way. It's considered double bevel, so you don't need one that has a double bevel. You can have one that bevels just one way or the other, and you can get away with just that feature. And this one slides, as you can see, and that's really important for wider trim, but for the trim we're doing, it doesn't need to slide, and most trims you won't need one that slides. And now the miter saw itself can miter this way and this way. Now, you definitely want one that can miter both ways, but typically miter saws you can miter both ways with no problem. So if you're looking for a saw, just get one that has a standard bevel but can miter both ways and you'll be just fine. Oh yeah, one last thing. Make sure you get a saw blade that's between 80 or 100 teeth. This one's 100 teeth. It's meant for more fine trim work. and this is the exact one that I'm using, and you can find it in the link in the description below if you need a saw blade. During this video, when I reference outside corners and inside corners, this is an inside corner and this is an outside corner. So as you can see, this flares out. Just so you don't get confused, this white crown molding is the actual crown molding I'll be installing on the kitchen cabinets, and this gray crown molding with the dark streak through it is just a scrap piece that I found that was perfect for showing you how to cut it. And now, just so you know, this streak that's going through this crown molding is going to act as the top of the crown, and then the bottom of the crown does not have the streak. I just thought it was easier to represent the top using the dark streak, even though technically it could be flipped the other way. This first method of cutting involves using this fence, and now this fence is going to represent the wall and this is going to represent the ceiling more or less. So in order to cut this trim using this method, we're going to have to flip it upside down. So this is upright, the way it's going to be installed, but we're going to want to turn it like this. So in order to cut it, we're going to lay it tight against this fence. You don't want it rocked one way or the other like so. You want to make sure we're setting square against the fence and the base of this saw. And now we're going to have to turn this at a 45-degree angle. As you can see, there are numbers across the bottom here. Right here's the 45. Now this is going to lock right at the 45 because there's a hard stop built into the saw. So like so. And now we're going to cut the end of this off at a 45. So we slide over just a little bit more. And now we're just going to go ahead and cut this right off. That's going to be one side of our crown like so. So it's going to be sitting like this. Now we need another piece that's going to go like this. So we're going to turn our saw going at a 45-degree this way to make this next angle cut. I'm now going to use another piece of trim. We're going to lay it tight right against this fence on this side going this way this time. And we're going to cut this off at a 45-degree angle. So now as you can see, this will make up the other corner like so. So if we take a look, if we put these together like this, we got a nice 45-degree angle right there, and it's mitered very nice. So that's going to sit right on top of the cabinet like that. But this is not my favorite way of cutting because it's hard to keep consistency unless you use some kind of stop fence on this saw. So if you were to make this corner on a cabinet, as you can see, there is nothing wrong with that method at all because it gives you a good result. In order to cut inside corners using the fence method, we're going to go ahead and slide our saw over to a 45-degree angle, place our trim tight against the fence. Now let's do this first piece upside down just like we did doing the outside corners. We're going to go right up to the 45-degree. Now this time we're going to be keeping this side of the cut. All right, now in order to cut the corresponding angle to this, we're going to slide our saw over to the 45 on this side and take our other piece of trim, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to put it upside down, and then we're going to slide it right up to where we got to cut it. Now this time, we're going to be keeping this side of the trim. Now as you can see, if you put these two pieces of trim together, it gives us a really nice inside corner like so. Not that you would ever put crown on the inside of a cabinet like this, but just show you what an inside corner looks like using that method. As you can see, there is nothing wrong with using that method to get great results. For this second method, we need to reference our chart. We know that this crown molding is a 45-degree spring angle, so we got to adjust our bevel accordingly and our miter. So if we know that this has to be set at a bevel at 30 degrees and then our miter has to be set at 35.3. So we're going to set the saw to those settings and then we're going to cut this trim. The gauge on the back of this saw lets me know what bevel this saw is set on. Right now this red indicator is set on 0, so I know the bevel is set at 0. And in order to adjust it, I just got to loosen up this by hand, and then it's going to let me tilt this whatever degree I need to set the bevel on. So as you can see, I'm moving it and I'm going to go right over to 30 degrees. And then once I'm right on 30 degrees, I'm just going to retighten this up. And now that's going to be my setting for cutting this crown molding. And this is going to stay here. I don't have to adjust this bevel anymore after it's set. Now that we have the bevel set, I'm going to explain how to adjust the miter. As you can see, we got predetermined numbers at the bottom of this saw. We got a 31.6 and a 35.3. And as you can see, this 31.6 on the chart would be for a 38-degree spring angle. And now this is going to be a 35.3 for this crown molding because it's a 45-degree spring angle. And always reference that chart to know what to cut it at. So what I'm going to do is slide this miter around to the 35.3 degree angle using this red indicator to let me know where I'm at, and right there, and we're going to lock the saw in place. And now this is going to be for cutting an outside corner. So we're going to hold it flat against the bottom of this saw, and we're going to go tight against this fence with the top of the crown molding against the fence. So we're going to cut this first. Now this is going to set like this right against the wall or the cabinets in this case. So in order to get the corresponding angle to go this way, we need to move this miter over to this side this time. So we're going to come over to this 35.3 degree mark and lock it into place. Now that we got our miter set, we're going to move this piece that we cut a second ago. Now this piece is going to be the next piece we're going to be using. Now as you can see, here's the top and here's the bottom. This time we're going to flip it upside down to where the bottom's against the fence. And we're going to hold it flat against the bottom of the miter here. And now we're going to slide it right to where we want to cut it. We're just going to cut it, and this is the piece we're going to keep. We're going to get rid of this piece, and now as you can see, this is going to be what our corner will look like once it's installed onto a cabinet, and that gives you a nice finished look as well. So that's how you cut an outside corner. Let me show you how to cut inside corners. In order to cut the inside corner, we're going to leave the miter at the 35.3 on this side, and now we're going to flip it over to where the bottom of the crown's against the fence and then the top of the crown is facing away. Then we're going to go ahead and cut this side. And this is the piece that we're going to be using, and this is the scrap. And as you can see, this time we have more of the wood on the angled part. And now we're going to move our miter over to the 35.3 on this side. Now this time, in order to cut the corresponding angle, we're going to put the top of the crown tight against the fence. And this is the bottom, and we're going to slide it over to where we want to cut it and give it a cut. And now, as you can see, we got our first piece we cut, and this is the piece we just cut. And as you can see, it's going to give us a nice inside corner. Pretty simple and easy to do, so I highly recommend using the chart method because you can sit this on the saw flat. It's just a much easier way to keep consistency. This crown molding came as a kit from the cabinet manufacturer. What we got here are 2 pieces of wood. These are going to act as nailers that's going to go up around top of the cabinet first. Then it's going to follow by this piece of trim because this is considered a stacked molding, but how you would install the crown molding is just like how you would install it without it being stacked, except you wouldn't have this piece, but this piece would go next. Then after that piece, we got our standard crown, which is what you're going to be familiar with. So I just want to show you what we're working with. So the first thing we're going to do is anchor these strips. Here's a diagram that came from the manufacturer. We got our nailer followed by the strip of trim. Then we got our crown molding. I'm going to anchor the nailers using these drywall screws. So in order to use the drywall screw, I got a pre-drill with an 1/8 inch drill bit, and we're just going to put about 4 across this whole nailer. Now after we pre-drill, we're just going to countersink those screws about 1/4 inch. In order to install this nailer, we're just going to place it flush with the face of this cabinet and right at the end of the face. So about right there, and I'm going to hold it really tight. And now what I'm going to do is just take my 1/8 inch drill bit and pre-drill it down into the face of this cabinet just a little bit. And we're going to do that at each screw hole. And now we're just going to take an impact driver and the drywall screws and anchor it right into those pilot holes. That's all there is to installing the nailer. Now we got to wrap around the side of this cabinet, and I got to show you what you got to do special here. When it comes to the finished side of these cabinets, as you notice, the face comes past the actual side of the cabinet. So what we got to do here is this nailer has to overlap the side of this cabinet about 1/4 inch, whatever the exact face is here. So we got to cut it to length and then let it overhang when we anchor it. All right, we got that cut. Let's set it up here into place. Now when you pre-drill this, we got to make sure that we stay towards the back side of this nailer so that way we miss the face of this. So it's going to sit about right there. Make sure we got a good even reveal going across this cabinet. Now this is going to get painted, so this is not going to stay wood trim like this because it will be exposed. Now I just got to finish the rest of the kitchen. We'll be ready to move on to the crown. Here is the corner cabinet, and as you can see, I did reinforce the joint using a drywall screw. I do recommend doing that even at the 90-degree angles. I'm now going to begin installing the molding around the cabinets, but I first want to go over the nail gun selection. The first one I want to go over is a straight nailer. Now this is a 16 gauge straight nailer, and this is great for installing baseboard, window casing, door casing, stuff of that nature, because the nails are thick compared to what's called a brad nailer. Now this brad nailer is an 18 gauge nailer, and it's going to be great for installing crown molding, and the reason why that is because it leaves just little pinholes using the 18 gauge nails compared to the 16 gauge nailer. And also, this is more for fine trim, like doing crown molding. So this is something you're going to want to install any kind of fine trim around the house as well, not just crown molding. So for this installation, I'm going to be using this 18 gauge brad nailer using 1.5" nails. I'm going to begin this crown molding installation by installing this molding first, because this is the stacked crown like I mentioned earlier. So this molding itself is very easy to install. Just going to wrap around like this, and it's just going to be 45-degree cuts with the bevel set at 0. So this is very straightforward. So we're going to start by getting the correct reveal, and the correct reveal on this is an 1/8 inch. If you look back at the pattern I showed you earlier that was sent by the manufacturer, they recommend an 1/8 inch reveal. So I'm just going to measure an 1/8 inch down and place it on the cabinet, and then over here we're going to do the same thing, just come down about an 1/8 inch and make a mark. So we're going to use those marks as our reference points to give us the correct reveal. And our first piece is going to be 12 inches. So I'm going to cut a 12-inch piece of this molding and get it installed. I now got my piece of molding cut with the 45-degree angle, and we're just going to butt straight up against the wall and make sure we're flush with our corner, and that looks really good. Now we got to hold our correct reveal, which is that 1/8 inch down from the top of the cabinet. And then I'm just going to take my brad nailer, and we're just going to tack a nail into the nailers that we installed before. And that's all there is to installing this molding, and then we just cut a 45 and continue the run around these cabinets. Now around to this side, we know that we got our 1/8 inch reveal here. So the face of this cabinet is 1 5/8 inches. So I'm going to measure up from this part of the cabinet 1.5 inches in order to get the correct reveal to continue this molding. And this next piece of molding is going to be a 45-degree for an outside corner coming into a 45-degree inside corner. So the angle of this molding is going to be going the same way on each end. Anytime you do trim work, you should always be sure to use wood glue on the joints. I'm now going to install this molding like we did the first piece, except this time on this end over here, we're going to hold it at the 1.5 inch mark to give me an 1/8 inch reveal down from the top of the cabinet. I'm now going to tack this molding on, and I try to nail it about every 8 inches or so. Now we just continue that process around all this cabinet. Now it's time to install the crown molding, and just so you're aware, if you don't have this piece to give it the stacked look, it's going to install exactly the same. So more or less your crown is going to shoot to the nailer instead of to this piece of molding if you do not have stacked crown molding, because most crown molding is not stacked like this. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and set this molding into place in the direction in which it's going to go. So we're going to go right up against the wall like so. And then we're going to line it up, in this case, a 1/16 from the edge of this molding. So it's going to look something like this. So this is the most accurate way to get a measurement, is to hold your molding or crown molding into place and take a lead pencil and mark the very edge. So that way we got the exact measurement on the crown. And you almost can't mess up your measurement then, so I recommend you holding your molding up and marking it versus taking a tape measure and measuring it. But if you like to do it that way, that's fine too. So now, since this is the 45-degree spring angle, I'm going to set my bevel to 30 on the miter saw, and then my miter on 35.3. So I'm going to cut this, then I'm going to install it. I now got the piece of crown molding cut, and just a word of advice, just try to visualize the angle when you go to cut it. So as you know, on an outside corner, we're going to have less wood pointing out. It's going to be pointing into or cut into the molding, to where if it was the inside corner, you're going to have more wood flaring out this way. So that's just a good little thing to keep in your mind when you go to make a cut, so that way you can set your saw properly. I even do it to this day, but it saved me a lot of time having to recut pieces just trying to visualize. Just a tip. Now we're going to set this up into place and get our correct reveal and then shoot this on to the piece of stack molding in this case. And again, it's going to be to the nailer if you don't have the stack crown molding. Now this is secured, we're going to move around to this side of the cabinet. I'm now going to show you how to accurately measure the next piece of crown molding. So in order to come around to this side of the cabinet, I had to pre-cut this piece of crown molding to join the angle that I cut on the last piece. So all we got to do now is come up here to where it's going to be installed and line it up with the piece that I already have installed on that side. And we're going to set it about where it goes there. And I'm going to come over here with my lead pencil and mark right back here in this corner to exactly where I need to cut. So I know I need to cut right from this mark and get my angle as a inside corner this time. So I'm just going to visualize that slope is going to slope this way, and I know my bevel is going to have to flare the wood out. So that's the easiest way in your mind to know which way to cut this stuff. I now got this piece cut, and I'm going to dry fit it before I use any kind of wood glue. And if we set it up there, it looks like it's going to work just fine. All right, so nothing wrong with that. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and put a little wood glue on the end of this, so that way we have a nice wood glue joint so it adds security. And I'm just going to continue the same reveal and nail it into place. And what I like to do on these corners is go ahead and put them right where they belong and take blue painter's tape or masking tape and tape this corner so that way it holds it into place while that glue sets up. As you can see, that corner turned out real nice, and what we're going to do is continue that run around the rest of the cabinets using those methods. The best word of advice I can give anybody that's going to tackle doing crown molding in their kitchen is take your time, get precise cuts, and have patience. You're definitely not going to be a master at this the first kitchen you do. I have done several kitchens in crown molding, and each one I get a little better and better, so it's a thing you're going to have to learn over time. There's a couple things here I want to explain to you. One, notice this trim is too short and it wasn't long enough to reach over here to this corner cabinet. So what you got to do in a case like that is either cut this at a 30-degree bevel or at a 22.5 degree. Either one's fine, just as long as you have two bevels that are going to line up with each other. So as you can see, I'm going to have to cut the next bevel to where the long edge is the face. And then when we get over here, the corner cabinet is going to be a 22.5 degree angle and a 22.5 degree angle here. So we got a 45 and a 45 instead of a 90 like all the other corners. So what we got to do here, when I cut this trim, I'm going to stick it against the fence just like I showed you the old-fashioned way at the beginning of this video. It's just easier for me to understand the cut here instead of trying to figure out the numbers. So we're going to go to the saw and place this saw at a 22.5 degree angle in the crown molding against the fence. I'm going to first begin by cutting the end that needs extended at the 30-degree bevel. Again, we're just going to set our trim flat on the fence and give it a cut. This is the only time you would ever keep this fence at 0 and a bevel at 30 is whenever you're extending trim. So now that we know that's going to be the piece that continues, we can now measure over to get our trim to cut into that corner cabinet. This is the length we need to cut it to. I'm now going to turn this bevel back to 0. So we are going back to 0 now. And we're going to move this miter over to 22.5 down here. And as you can see, there's a pre-marked area there for that. And it actually locks right there. And what we're going to do is take our trim and, well, our crown molding, we're going to lay it right against the fence. And I already have it marked right here. Make sure, again, you're square on the fence when you go to make this cut. And I have it right on the mark I made right underneath there. And now we're going to go ahead and cut it. As you can see, this is going to be our corner, and this is going to be the extended part that continues. And now if we place this up where it belongs, as you can see, that is what's going to look like when it extends across the rest of the cabinets. And then when we get over here, you can see our angle looks really nice. I'm sure you've probably noticed there are no cabinet doors on the cabinets except for the pantry, and the reason why that is they are in the way during the installation of the crown, and also I'm going to put those on after I get the crown done. The last step of this crown is filling in the nail holes and any kind of cracks that's in the joints of the trim, and then we're going to put another coat of paint over top this pre-painted trim so that way it gives it a nice finished look. And if you need to know how to install these cabinets, check out this video. It'll help you out.